As your new wife, I'm graciously allowing your mother to live in my old apartment, Harper announced, gripping the microphone in the center of the banquet hall. A murmur of approval swept through the tables. Some guests applauded politely. Others nodded with admiring smiles. I stood near the head table, clutching a glass of champagne I no longer had the stomach to drink, feeling every pair of eyes in the room pivot toward me, waiting for my reaction. Harper looked radiant in her fitted white gown. Her hair swept up in an elaborate chignon, that smile of hers looking like it had been painted onto her face. My son, Liam, stood beside her, squeezing her hand with a conspiratorial look, glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher in that moment. I smiled. It was an automatic gesture, a response conditioned by years of being polite, of not causing trouble, of always keeping the peace. I appreciate your generosity, Harper, I said, my voice as steady as I could manage. But I live very happily at my farmhouse. I don't need to move anywhere. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. I saw guests exchanging confused glances. I heard whispers. Harper kept her smile, but something shifted in her eyes, a cold glint that vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Liam interrupted immediately. "Mom," he said, his voice cutting through the air like shattered glass. "I decided not to tell you earlier because I didn't want to ruin the day. But my in-laws and my sister-in-law are moving there, to your farmhouse. It's all arranged." I felt the floor drop out from under me. The chandeliers in the ballroom suddenly seemed blindingly bright. The background noise faded into a distant hum. I looked at Liam, searching for some sign that this was a joke, some indication I had misheard. But no. He looked at me with absolute seriousness. It was that expression he wore when he had made up his mind and would brook no argument. I scanned the room, looking for faces I didn't know well. Harper's parents, her sister, the Sterling family. I swept my gaze over every table, decorated with white hydrangeas and linen tablecloths. I searched through the groups of guests, chatting and laughing, but they weren't there. "Where are they?" I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. "Where are your in-laws and your sister-in-law, Liam?" "Mom," he replied with a casualness that pierced me like ice. "They went to the farmhouse a few hours ago. We wanted them to start getting settled while we were here at the ceremony. It was just more practical this way." The words rained down on me like stones. While I was here, at this wedding reception, celebrating what I thought was a special moment for my son, 3 people I barely knew were inside my house, in my farmhouse, in the place I had bought with 30 years of work and sacrifice. Then I spoke up, loud enough for everyone in that hall to hear. "No one lives in my farmhouse without my consent. No one." The silence that followed was absolute. The jazz band in the corner seemed to stop playing. Conversations ceased. Everyone was staring at us now. Liam's face flushed a deep crimson. Harper was no longer smiling. "Mom, you're making a scene," Liam hissed, taking a step toward me. "Don't ruin my wedding with your whims." "Whims?" I repeated, feeling something fracture inside my chest. "Defending my property is a whim now?" Harper stepped forward, crossing her arms. "Eleanor, my family needs a place to live. You have that huge farmhouse for just one person. It's selfish of you to refuse when I'm offering you my apartment in exchange. It's a fair trade." Fair. That word echoed in my head like a cruel joke. There was nothing fair about this. Nothing fair about them disposing of my home without asking me. Nothing fair about offering me a favor I had never requested. "I didn't ask for your apartment, Harper," I replied, maintaining my calm even though I was trembling on the inside. "And your family has no right to enter my property without my authorization. I don't care what you agreed to between yourselves. That farm is mine." Liam raised his voice. "It's already decided, Mom. They're staying there. You can move into the apartment or find somewhere else, but this isn't negotiable." Not negotiable. The words of my son, of the boy I had raised alone after becoming a widow, of the young man for whom I had worked double shifts at the plant to pay for his tuition, of the man who was now kicking me out of my own home. I took off the shawl I was wearing and let it drop onto the nearest chair. I gripped my purse with shaking but firm hands. I took a step back, distancing myself from them. "So you've decided for me," I said, looking Liam directly in the eyes. "You've decided to give away what isn't yours. You've decided that your mother doesn't even deserve to be consulted about her own home. Mom, Don't exaggerate. It's just 3 people. The house has 4 bedrooms. There's plenty of space. Plenty of space. As if that were the only thing that mattered. As if the years I worked to buy that land meant nothing. As if my right to decide over my own sanctuary was something he could just ignore. I'm leaving, I announced clearly. I'm leaving this party right now. And when I get to my farm, your in-laws and your sister-in-law are going to have to leave. I don't care how you solve it, Liam. But that house is mine and mine alone. You can't do that, he shouted. We already told them they could stay. You can't humiliate me like this in front of everyone. I looked at him, feeling a profound sadness mixed with something new I was just beginning to recognize. It was anger. It was disappointment. But it was also clarity. You humiliated me first, son. You decided on my life without consulting me. You gave away what wasn't yours to look good for your wife. Now, I decide for myself. I turned around and started walking toward the exit. Every step took an enormous effort. I could feel the stairs burning into my back. I heard whispers, stifled gasps, Liam's name being pronounced with pity or judgment. Harper yelled something behind me, but I wasn't listening anymore. Her words were lost in the buzzing that filled my ears. Liam called me one more time, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. If I did, if I hesitated for even a second, I would crumble right there. I reached the exit of the banquet hall, and the cool night air hit my face. I breathed deeply, feeling the oxygen fill my lungs. My hands shook as I dug for my car keys in my purse. I had to get to the farm. I had to see with my own eyes what was happening there. I had to face these people who had entered my house as if they had some right to it. I got into my car and locked the door. For a moment I sat still, gripping the steering wheel tight, trying to steady the tremors in my hands. I could see the lights of the venue through the windshield. I could imagine what they were saying inside, the comments, the judgments, the opinions about the groom's mother who ruined the wedding. But something had shifted inside me, something fundamental that had nothing to do with what others thought. I started the engine and drove out of the parking lot. The road to the farmhouse was dark. There were barely any other vehicles. The city lights faded behind me as I advanced along the route I knew by heart. It had been 20 years since I bought that property. 20 years since I signed the papers with shaking hands, unable to believe I finally had something of my own. A place where no one could tell me what to do. A space built with my effort, with my labor, with my dreams of having a quiet refuge for my old age. Liam was 10 when we moved there. I remember how he ran around the land, exploring every corner, how he helped me plant the first apple trees, how he told me that when he grew up, he was going to take care of me and the farm. Now that same boy was taking everything from me. I gripped the wheel harder. I wasn't going to cry. Not yet. First, I had to resolve this. First, I had to get home and see what was really going on. The road narrowed as I got closer. The trees on the sides formed dark shadows under the moonlight. I knew every curve, every rise, every dip of that road. Finally, I saw the front gate. It was open. That never happened. I always locked it. Always. I drove in slowly, my heart beating faster and faster. The house lights were on. All the lights, as if someone had decided to illuminate every single room. I parked near the main entrance and sat there for a moment longer. I took 3 deep breaths, trying to calm myself. I needed to be calm. I needed to think clearly. I got out of the car and walked to the door. It was ajar. I always locked the door when I left. Always. I pushed the door gently and walked in. The first thing I saw were the suitcases. 3 large suitcases piled in the entryway of my living room. Then I saw boxes. Cardboard boxes with clothes, personal items, things that weren't mine. I heard voices coming from the kitchen. Laughter, the sound of plates clattering. Someone was cooking on my stove. I walked toward the kitchen, feeling a mixture of disbelief and rage growing with every step. When I reached the doorway, there were 3 people I barely knew. An older woman with gray hair stood at the stove. A man my age was rummaging through the refrigerator, and a young woman sitting at the table was eating calmly from a plate I recognized as my good china. They turned when they saw me. The older woman smiled. "Eleanor, so good that you're here. We were just making some dinner. Liam told us it was no problem for us to get settled in." I stood in the doorframe, staring at them. These people had walked into my house. They had opened my refrigerator. They were using my things, and they were acting like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice low but firm. The three of them looked at me as if they hadn't understood. "Excuse me?" said the young woman, putting her fork down. "I said, get out of my house," I repeated, louder this time. "All three of you, right now." I hadn't always been a woman of silence. There was a time when my voice filled spaces, when my decisions mattered, when I knew exactly who I was and what I wanted. But that was many years ago, before life taught me that sometimes love means staying quiet, means yielding, means putting others first, even if it means losing yourself along the way. I met James when I was 23. He worked at the same manufacturing plant where I had just gotten a job as a machine operator. He was a good man, hardworking, with rough hands and an honest laugh that made me feel safe. We married 6 months after meeting, in a simple ceremony with barely 20 guests. Liam was born a year later. I remember the first time I held him in my arms, wrapped in a pale blue blanket I had knitted myself during the last months of pregnancy. He was so small, so fragile, so completely dependent on me. James cried tears of happiness looking at our son. "We're going to give him everything, Eleanor," he told me. "Everything we never had," and we did. Or at least we tried. We lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. James worked double shifts at the plant while I stayed home caring for Liam. The money barely stretched, but we were happy. Or that's what I told myself every night when I went to bed exhausted after a full day of washing, cooking, cleaning, tending to a baby who cried incessantly. When Liam turned 4, James started complaining of headaches. At first, we thought it was fatigue, the stress of work, the overtime he worked so we could save a little. But the pain got worse. There came a day when he couldn't get out of bed without feeling like the world was spinning around him. I took him to the county hospital. We waited 7 hours to be seen. The doctor told us they needed to run scans, that there was something in his brain that didn't look right on the basic exams. The co-pays and deductibles were thousands of dollars. We had barely $300 in savings. We borrowed from family, from friends, from co-workers. We scraped the money together bit by bit, in crumpled bills people handed us with pity in their eyes. Finally, we paid for the scans. The result came 2 weeks later. Brain tumor, inoperable. 6 months to live, maybe less. I remember James took my hand when the doctor gave us the news. His hand was trembling, but his voice was steady. "We're going to be fine, Eleanor. You and Liam are going to be fine. I'm going to handle this." But there was no time to handle anything. James died 4 months later, in a hospital bed, holding my hand until the very last moment. I was 29, Liam was 5, and suddenly I was a widow, alone, with no income, a child to feed, and rent to pay. I went back to the plant. I got my old job back as a machine operator. The pay was meager. The rent took half my check. Food, transportation, utilities, clothes, Liam's school supplies, everything came out of those wages, earned working 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. Liam grew fast. He was a smart boy, curious, with his father's smile. I enrolled him in the local public school. Every morning, I dropped him off before heading to the plant, and every afternoon, I picked him up after my shift. We ate dinner together in that small apartment that never seemed to have enough light. I helped him with his homework while he told me about his day. "You were always good with numbers, Mom," he told me when I explained math problems to him. "You should have studied more. You should be a teacher or something." I smiled and didn't tell him the truth. That I had to drop out of high school to work and help my family. That my own dreams had been buried under the needs of others. That now my only dream was to see him grow, study, and have the opportunities I never had. Years passed. Liam finished elementary school and started high school. I was still at the plant, but I had taken a second job cleaning office buildings at night. I left the factory at 6, picked up Liam, gave him dinner, and at 8 I went out again to clean until midnight. I slept 5 hours a night if I was lucky. When Liam turned 15, he told me he wanted to study engineering. I knew what that meant. Out-of-state tuition because the local state college didn't have the program. Tuition was astronomical. Books, transport, materials, everything I didn't have, but was going to get somehow. I started saving every cent. I stopped buying red meat and bought only cheap chicken or canned tuna. I stopped buying clothes and wore the same things I had owned for years. I walked instead of taking the bus whenever I could. Every dollar I didn't spend went into an old coffee tin I hid under my bed. Liam graduated high school with honors. I cried with pride at the ceremony. My son, the son of a factory worker and a man who died too young, was going to college. He was going to be an engineer. He was going to have a better life than ours. College cost everything I had and more. I got a third job on weekends, selling homemade pies and cakes at the farmer's market, getting up at 4 a.m. on Saturdays and Sundays to bake goods that I sold until 2 p.m. Then I went home, took a short nap, and kept up with the housework. Liam studied hard. He was a good student, responsible, dedicated, but I also started noticing changes in him. He didn't tell me as much about his day. He spent more time with his college friends than with me. When I asked him how things were going, he answered in monosyllables. Fine. Nothing special. Don't worry about it. He met Harper in his junior year. She was also studying engineering. She came from a wealthy family who lived in the best part of the city. The first time Liam spoke of her, I noticed something different in his voice. An enthusiasm I hadn't heard before. An admiration that bordered on obsession. I'd like you to meet her, Mom, he said one afternoon. She's incredible. She's smart, beautiful, and her family has important connections. Her dad owns a construction firm. I smiled and said I'd love to meet her. But something inside me tensed. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the fear of a mother who knows her son is growing up and pulling away. I don't know. Harper came to dinner at the apartment one Saturday night. She arrived in an elegant dress and heels that clicked loudly against the worn floor of the living room. She looked around with an expression that tried to be polite but failed to hide her disdain. It's cozy, she said with a forced smile. Very authentic. I prepared my best meal. Roast chicken with potatoes and salad. Homemade bread I had baked that morning. A simple fruit cobbler with cream. Harper ate little, moving the food around her plate more than bringing it to her mouth. She talked almost the entire dinner about her family, about the trips they had taken to Europe, about her father's company expansion plans. Liam looked at her, entranced. I looked at him and saw a young man who was falling in love not just with a woman, but with a lifestyle he had never had. After that dinner, Liam started spending less time at home. He spent weekends with Harper and her family. He called less. When he came to the apartment, he was always in a hurry to leave. There was always something more important to do. I told myself it was normal. That children grow up and become independent. That I should be happy he had a life of his own, friends, a girlfriend. But deep down I felt a void growing every day. Liam graduated as an engineer at 24. I was at the ceremony in a dress I had bought second-hand, but which had cost me 2 weeks of savings. I watched him go up on stage to receive his diploma and felt that everything had been worth it. The years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the extra jobs, everything. He got a job immediately at Harper's father's company, a position with a good salary, benefits, opportunities for growth. He moved into a nice condo in a safer neighborhood. I helped him move, carrying boxes even though my back ached. You'll come visit often, right, Mom? He said as we arranged the furniture in his new living room. Of course, son, I replied. Whenever you want me to come, I'll be here. But the visits became sporadic. Once a week turned into once every 2 weeks. Then once a month. Then only on special occasions. Birthdays, Thanksgiving, Christmas. I was still working at the plant. I had quit the other jobs because my body couldn't handle the pace anymore. I was 52 and felt every year in my joints, in my back, in my hands that could no longer hold heavy things without trembling. It was around that time I started thinking about buying a property, something of my own, a place where I could spend my final years in peace. I had saved for 30 years. I never allowed myself luxuries. I never spent on unnecessary things. Everything went into that account, which now held nearly $50,000 for a down payment. I looked for months. Finally, I found the farmhouse. It was an hour from the city, surrounded by trees, with a large lot and a simple 4-bedroom house. The price was right for a fixer-upper in the country. It was perfect. I told Liam about my plan. He frowned. Why do you want to go so far away? Mom, "You're going to be alone out there. It's better if you stay close by." But I had already made the decision. I signed the papers, put down my life savings, took out a manageable mortgage, and moved to the farm when I was 54. Liam helped me move, but he complained the whole time about the distance, about how isolated the place was, about what would happen if I got sick. "I'll be fine," I told him. "This is my dream, my own place." And it was. For the first few years, the farm was my sanctuary. I planted a vegetable garden and flowers. I fixed up the house bit by bit, painted the walls, refinished the floors. I made the place feel truly mine. For the first time in my life, I felt I had something no one could take away from me. Liam came to visit less and less. He always had work, commitments, plans with Harper. I understood. Or at least I told myself I did. Children have their own lives. It's natural. It's how it should be. When Liam announced he was marrying Harper, I was happy for him. I asked if I could help with anything, if he needed money for the wedding. He told me no, that Harper's family was taking care of everything, that he only needed me to be there on the day of the ceremony. And I was there, in my best dress, with a smile on my face, happy for my son, even though inside I felt something breaking. Because I knew that look in Harper's eyes. That way she observed me as if I were something to be tolerated, something to be disposed of eventually. The preparations for Liam's wedding had begun 6 months before the official date. I found out through a quick, almost casual phone call where my son informed me they had set the day and booked the venue. He didn't ask my opinion on the date. He didn't consult me to see if that day worked for me. He simply stated it, like someone announcing the weather forecast. Harper's family took charge of everything from the start. Every detail, every decision, every element of the celebration passed through the hands of Linda Sterling, the bride's mother. A woman of 62, with perfectly dyed chestnut hair, designer clothes, and a way of speaking that made it clear she knew more than everyone else about any subject. I tried to get involved at first. I asked Liam if I could help with anything, if they needed me to collaborate on any aspect of the organization. He told me not to worry, that everything was under control, that Harper's family had experience with these types of events. "But I'm his mother," I said, trying not to sound desperate. "I'd like to participate, even if it's something small." "Mom, don't complicate things," he replied with that tone he had developed in recent years, a mix of forced patience and barely contained annoyance. "There are already enough people handling everything. You just have to show up on the wedding day and enjoy yourself." Enjoy myself. As if I were just another guest, and not the groom's mother. Weeks passed, and I still knew nothing concrete about the wedding. I didn't know what colors they had chosen for the decor. I didn't know how many people were attending. I didn't know if they wanted me to give a speech, or if they simply expected me to sit in silence and clap when appropriate. I decided to visit Liam at his condo one Saturday afternoon. I rang the doorbell and waited several minutes before he opened the door. He had messy hair and looked like he had just woken up, even though it was already 2 in the afternoon. "Mom, I didn't know you were coming," he said without moving from the doorway. "I wanted to talk to you about the wedding," I replied. "I haven't heard anything in weeks and I'd like to be in the loop." He sighed and finally let me in. The condo was messy. Boxes were stacked in a corner, clothes thrown over the sofa, dirty dishes on the dining table. This wasn't how I had raised him, but it wasn't my place to say anything anymore. Harper arrived a few minutes later. She walked in with shopping bags from expensive boutiques, wearing sunglasses even though we were inside. She greeted me with a peck on the cheek that barely grazed my skin. "Eleanor, what a surprise," she said, dropping the bags on the sofa. "We didn't know you were coming." "I just wanted to talk about the wedding," I repeated, feeling my voice sound smaller and smaller. "I'd like to know if there's anything I can help with." Harper exchanged a look with Liam before answering. "Well, everything is pretty much set. My mother has handled every detail. She's an expert at organizing events. Actually, she just hired the best catering service in the city. It costs nearly $20,000, but it's worth every penny. $20,000 on food. I had married James with a total budget of $500, and we had been just as happy. But I said nothing. I just nodded. "And is there anything I can contribute?" I asked. "Maybe the flowers or the centerpieces or something?" Harper smiled in that way I had learned to recognize. A smile that didn't reach her eyes. a smile that said my offer was unnecessary and likely unwelcome. That's very sweet of you, Eleanor, but really, it's all covered. My father insisted on paying for the entire wedding. You just have to worry about showing up and having a good time. There was that phrase again. Just worry about showing up. As if I had no real role in my son's life, beyond being a spectator. And my dress? I asked. Is there a specific color I should wear or avoid? Harper shrugged. Whatever you want is fine. We don't have a strict dress code for the guests. Guests. She had just called me a guest at my own son's wedding. Liam intervened. Mom, don't take it the wrong way. Harper just means there's no pressure on what to wear. Wear whatever makes you feel comfortable. Comfortable. That word rang hollow. There was nothing comfortable about feeling excluded from the most important preparations in my only son's life. I stayed a few minutes more asking questions that Harper answered vaguely. Finally, I understood that my presence there wasn't desired, and I said goodbye. Liam walked me to the door. Don't feel bad, Mom, he said quietly. It's just that Harper and her family have a very particular way of doing things. It's better to let them handle it. I nodded and walked out of the condo with a weight in my chest I hadn't felt before. On the drive back to the farm, I stared out the window, wondering at what moment I had lost my son. At what moment had I gone from being the most important person in his life to being someone in the way? The following weeks were a series of small exclusions piling up. Liam called less. When he did, the conversations were brief and superficial. How are you? Fine. How's everything going? Good. See you at the wedding? Sure. I tried not to think too much about it. I told myself he was busy with preparations, work, his new life, but at night, when the farmhouse fell silent and I lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel that something was breaking between us, something that perhaps couldn't be repaired. A month before the wedding, I received a call from Linda Sterling. It was the first time she had contacted me directly. Her voice was sweet, but with a barely perceptible edge. Eleanor, I need to ask you something important, she said. Liam mentioned that you live alone on a rather large farm. Is that correct? Yes, I replied, not understanding where the conversation was going. I've lived on my farm for almost 10 years. It must be difficult to maintain such a large property at your age, she continued. And you must feel lonely out there, so far from everything. I'm very well, I said, feeling my back tense up. I like my house, and I don't feel lonely. There was a brief pause. Of course, Linda said. I was just asking because we are looking for a quieter place. The city has become so noisy, and my husband Richard needs clean air for his respiratory issues. And Tiffany, our youngest, also prefers a more country atmosphere. I didn't answer. Something in her tone put me on alert. Anyway, just curious, she finished. See you at the wedding, Eleanor. She hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling an uneasiness I couldn't explain. There was something about that conversation I didn't like, something that sounded like preparation for something bigger. 2 weeks before the wedding, Liam came to visit me at the farm. He arrived alone, which was strange because lately he always came with Harper. He sat in the living room and accepted the coffee I offered, but there was a tension in him that made me nervous. Mom, I need to talk to you about something. He started after several minutes of awkward silence. Tell me, son. He looked at his coffee cup, as if the words he needed were inside. Harper and I have been thinking about the future, about how we want to build our life together. That's normal, I said. That's what any couple getting married does. Yes, but we've also been thinking about family, about how to take care of everyone. You know, Harper's parents aren't going through a good time financially. Her dad's business has had problems, and they need to cut costs. I listened, still not understanding where he was going with this. And Tiffany isn't doing well either, Liam continued. She broke up with her boyfriend and lost her job. She's going through a tough time. She needs a quiet place to recover. I'm sorry for them, I said sincerely. But I don't see what that has to do with me. Liam finally looked me in the eye. Mom, your farmhouse is huge. It has 4 bedrooms. You only use 1. There's plenty of space. My heart started beating faster. No, I thought. He can't be suggesting what I think he's suggesting. Liam, this is my house, I said, trying to stay calm. It's my space, my sanctuary. I know, Mom, but think about family. They need help, and you have the resources to give it to them. It would only be temporary, until they stabilize. No, I repeated more firmly. This house is mine. I bought it with my work. I am not going to share it with people I barely know. Liam's expression changed. It became harder, colder. I knew you were going to react like this, he said. You've always been selfish with your things. Selfish, that word again. The same one he would say later at the wedding in front of everyone. I am not selfish, I replied, feeling my voice crack. I gave my whole life for you. I worked 3 jobs to pay for your college. I sacrificed everything, and now you call me selfish because I don't want to give away my house? It's not giving away, Mom. It's sharing. It's helping. It's what people who care about their family do. They are not my family, I said. They are Harper's family, and if they need help, let them look for it somewhere else. Liam stood up abruptly. I knew I couldn't count on you, he said. Harper was right. She said you were going to be difficult, that you only thought about yourself. He left the house, slamming the door. I stayed seated in the living room, trembling. Not from cold, but from rage, from pain, from disbelief. My son had just called me selfish and difficult because I refused to hand over my house. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, thinking about the conversation, about Liam's words, about what Harper had been saying about me behind my back. I understood then that they had been planning this for a while, that Linda's call hadn't been random, that it was all part of a strategy to pressure me. But I wasn't going to yield. This farm was mine. I had bought it with 30 years of sacrifice. It was the only place in the world where I felt truly at peace. And no one, not even my own son, was going to take it from me. The wedding day arrived with a clear sky and a gentle breeze moving the curtains of my bedroom. I woke up early even though the ceremony didn't start until 6 in the evening. I had slept poorly, with fragmented dreams where Liam shouted things at me I couldn't quite understand and Harper laughed from somewhere I couldn't see. I got up, made coffee, and sat on the porch looking at the garden I had cultivated for years. The apple trees I had planted with my own hands were already bearing fruit. The flowers growing along the driveway filled the air with their sweet perfume. This place was mine. I had built it with effort, with patience, with the hope of having a refuge in my later years. I passed the morning tidying up details in the house. I watered the plants, organized shelves, cleaned surfaces that were already clean. Anything to keep my mind occupied and not think about the conversation I had with Liam 2 weeks ago, about how he had called me selfish, about how he had stormed out of my house. At 2 in the afternoon, I started getting ready. I took a long bath, dried my hair carefully, applied light makeup. I took the dress I had bought especially for the occasion out of the closet. It was wine-colored, elegant but discreet, with long sleeves and a cut that flattered my figure. It had cost me $200 that I had saved for months. I wanted to look good for my son. I wanted him to be proud of me. I put on the dress, the low-heeled shoes I had polished that morning, and a faux pearl necklace James had given me on our 2nd anniversary. I looked in the mirror and saw a 64-year-old woman who had worked her whole life, who had lost the love of her youth, who had raised a son alone, and who was now preparing to watch him marry a woman who despised her. I left the farm at 4:30. The venue was an hour away from the city. I drove in silence, listening only to the sound of the engine and the tires on the pavement. The sky remained clear. It was warm, but not too hot. It was a perfect day for a wedding. I arrived 15 minutes before the ceremony began. It was an elegant place, with white walls, high ceilings, and crystal chandeliers that reflected the light in thousands of sparkles. There were flowers everywhere, white roses, lilies, orchids. The decoration must have cost a fortune. The guests were starting to arrive. I recognized some distant relatives, co-workers of Liam's, people I hadn't seen in years, all dressed in expensive clothes, speaking in hushed tones, admiring the decor. I stood near the entrance, not knowing quite where to place myself. An event coordinator approached me. "You are the groom's mother?" she asked with a professional smile. "Yes," I replied. "Perfect. Your seat is in the front row on the left side. Please, follow me." She led me to my seat. It was a prime spot with a direct view of the improvised altar where Liam and Harper would marry. But I was alone in that row. There was no one else seated near me. On the other side, The front row on the right was full. Linda Sterling in a gold dress, Richard Sterling in a dark suit, Tiffany Sterling in a pink dress that showed too much skin, and several other relatives of Harper conversing animatedly among themselves. I sat and waited. Guests kept arriving. The hall filled up. Everyone seemed to know each other. Everyone seemed to belong to a world I didn't know, a world of money, contacts, conversations about trips and businesses and properties. The music started. Liam entered from the side of the altar with his best man. He looked nervous but happy. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that fit him well. He stood at the altar and looked toward the entrance, waiting for his bride. Then Harper made her entrance. She walked arm in arm with her father down the center aisle while everyone stood to see her. Her dress was spectacular, bright white with crystal embroidery, a long train that two little girls held carefully. The veil covered her face, but you could see her satisfied smile beneath the transparent fabric. The ceremony was short. The justice of the peace officiated, speaking about love, commitment, family. Liam and Harper exchanged vows they had written themselves, pretty words about the future, about building a life together, about loving each other forever. I listened and felt a huge distance between my son and me, as if the man standing there at the altar were a stranger with Liam's face. They kissed when the officiant declared them husband and wife. The guests applauded. The music played louder. Everyone stood as the couple walked down the aisle holding hands, smiling for the cameras capturing every moment. Then came the reception. Tables were decorated with white tablecloths, fresh flowers, and elegant china. There was an elevated head table where the bride and groom would sit, along with both sets of parents. As I headed there, Linda intercepted me. "Eleanor, your seat is at that table," she said, pointing to a table next to the head table, but not at it. "But I'm the groom's mother," I said, confused. "I know, but we decided that only the couple and us would be at the head table. It's a tradition in our family. I hope you understand." I didn't understand. In no wedding I had ever seen was the groom's mother excluded from the head table. But I said nothing. I just nodded and went to sit where they indicated. At that table were some of Liam's distant uncles, who barely spoke to me all night. Dinner was served. Seafood appetizer I barely touched because I wasn't hungry. Main course of steak with vegetables I ate in silence while listening to the conversations around me. Everyone talked about how beautiful the wedding was, how elegant the place was, how good the couple looked. Then the speeches began. Richard Sterling was first. He stood at the head table with a glass of champagne and spoke about his daughter, about how proud he was of her, about how Liam was a good man who deserved someone as special as Harper. Everyone applauded. Then Linda spoke. She cried while telling anecdotes from Harper's childhood, describing how happy she was to see her married, wishing the couple all the happiness in the world. More applause. I waited for my turn to speak, but it never came. No one gave me the microphone. No one asked me to say a few words about my son. It was as if I didn't exist, as if Liam didn't have a mother. I remained seated, feeling humiliation turn into a physical weight on my chest. I looked at Liam, looking for some sign that he realized I had been excluded from everything, but he was busy laughing with Harper, pouring champagne, greeting guests who approached to congratulate him. The music started and people began to dance. I stayed in my chair observing. No one asked me to dance. No one came to talk to me beyond superficial greetings. I felt invisible. It was then that Harper took the microphone. The room fell silent as she waited with that perfect smile I knew so well. I looked at her wondering what she was going to say now, and then she said it. Those words that would change everything. "As your new wife, I'm graciously allowing your mother to live in my old apartment." The room erupted in murmurs of approval. I felt every gaze turn toward me. I felt the heat rising to my face. I felt the humiliation of being treated like a charity case, like someone who needed permission from others to have a place to live. I smiled. It was a reflex, a habit ingrained from years of being polite, of not causing trouble, of keeping up appearances. "I appreciate your generosity, Harper," I said with the steadiest voice I could find. "But I live very happily at my farmhouse." I saw Harper's smile freeze for just a second. I saw Liam tense up, and then he spoke. "Mom, I decided not to tell you earlier because I didn't want to ruin this day, but my in-laws and my sister-in-law are moving there. The world stopped. Liam's words echoed in my ears, but my brain couldn't fully process them. I looked around the hall looking for the Sterlings. Linda wasn't at the head table. Neither was Richard. Tiffany had disappeared. All three had disappeared. Where are they? I asked, my voice weak. Where are they right now? They went ahead to the farm. Mom, Liam replied with that cruel naturalness. They went a few hours ago to start getting settled. We thought it was better this way. I did not authorize that. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. I did not give permission for anyone to enter my property. Mom, don't make a scene, Liam said, looking at me with a mix of shame and anger. They need a place and you have plenty of room. Don't be selfish. Selfish. There was that word again, pronounced in front of 200 people, hurled against me like a public insult. Harper approached, her wedding dress swishing against the floor. Eleanor, my family needs that place. You are alone on that huge farm. It's only fair that you share your space. Besides, I'm offering you my apartment. It's a reasonable trade. Fair, reasonable. Words that sounded nice but hid the theft of my home, the theft of my peace, the theft of the only thing that was truly mine. I looked at my son, the boy who had grown up in my arms, the young man who had cried on my shoulder when his father died, the man who now looked at me as if I were an annoying obstacle in his plans. Then I said loudly so everyone could hear, "No one lives in my farmhouse without my consent. If your in-laws and your sister-in-law are there right now, I suggest you call them and tell them to leave, because that property is mine and mine alone." The silence was total. I could hear my own breathing. I could feel every pair of eyes pinned on me. Liam's face was red with embarrassment and rage. "You are ruining my wedding," he muttered through gritted teeth. "No, son," I replied, feeling a cold clarity. "You are making a fool of yourself by disposing of my property without consulting me, by inviting people to live in my house without my permission." Harper crossed her arms. "You are ungrateful. My family just needs help, and you have plenty of space. You should be grateful I'm offering you my apartment." "I don't need your apartment," I said, staring at her. "And your family has no right to my farm. I worked 30 years to buy that property. No one gave it to me, and no one is going to take it from me." Liam took a step toward me. "It's already decided. They stay, period. You can move or find another place." Something broke inside me in that moment. It wasn't just pain. It was absolute lucidity. My son was kicking me out of my own house. He was taking the only thing I had, and he was doing it in front of everyone as if he had that right. I picked up my shawl from the chair. I grabbed my purse with both hands. "So you have made your decision," I said with a firm voice, "and I am making mine. I am leaving now, and when I get to my farm, I am going to make your in-laws leave. I don't care how you solve it." "You can't humiliate me like this," Liam shouted. "You humiliated me first. You gave away what wasn't yours. You decided for me. Now I decide for myself. And this wedding is over for me." I turned and started walking toward the exit. Murmurs exploded behind me. I heard voices, exclamations, my name being spoken. But I didn't stop. I kept walking with my head held high and my heart shattered, but with a determination I hadn't felt in years. The cool night air hit my face as I left the banquet hall. I breathed deeply, trying to calm the tremor running through my body. My hands shook as I fished for the car keys in my purse. My fingers fumbled. The keys slipped. I had to try 3 times before I could grip them firmly. I got into the car and locked the door. For a moment I sat completely still, hands on the wheel, looking at the hall lights through the windshield. I could imagine what was happening inside. The whispers, the comments, the disapproving looks at the groom's mother, who had ruined the wedding with her selfishness. But I knew the truth. I hadn't ruined anything. They had crossed a line they shouldn't have crossed. They had taken something that wasn't theirs, and I wasn't going to sit there accepting it with a smile. I started the engine and drove out of the lot. The city streets were lit up, and there was traffic even though it was almost 9 at night. I drove carefully, forcing myself to focus on the road, even though my mind wanted to race in 1,000 different directions. I needed to get to the farm. I needed to see with my own eyes what was happening. I needed to confront these people who had entered my house without permission. But as I drove, a voice in my head began to whisper doubts. "What are you going to do when you arrive? How are you going to get 3 people out of your house? What are you going to say? Do you have any legal right to kick them out? Or is Liam right and you're just being difficult? I shook my head, trying to silence those voices. No, I had every right in the world. That property was in my name. I had paid every cent. I was the legal owner, and no one could stay there without my consent. But still, fear tightened my stomach. When I left the city and took the highway toward the farm, I took out my cell phone. I needed to talk to someone. I needed advice. I thought about calling some of my old coworkers from the plant, but I hadn't spoken to them in years. I thought about calling my cousin Mary, but she lived in another state and couldn't help with anything practical. Then I remembered Mr. Harrison. He was a lawyer I had met briefly at a holiday party a few years back. He had given me his card, saying if I ever needed legal advice to call him. I had kept that card in my wallet without thinking I'd ever need it. I pulled the car onto the shoulder of the highway and searched for the card with trembling hands. It was bent and worn, but the number was still legible. I dialed, not knowing if he would answer at this hour. The phone rang 4 times before a male voice answered. Hello, Mr. Harrison. My name is Eleanor Davis. I don't know if you remember me. We met a few years ago at the Miller's house. There was a pause. Eleanor. Yes, I believe I remember. What can I do for you? I apologize for calling so late, I said, feeling my voice crack a little. But I have a legal emergency, and I don't know who else to turn to. Tell me what's happening, he replied with a professional but kind tone. I explained the situation as clearly as I could. My son, his wedding, his wife's family, the farm, how they had entered without my permission while I was at the ceremony. I spoke fast, stumbling over words, trying not to sound hysterical even though inside I felt like I was about to crumble. Mr. Harrison listened without interrupting. When I finished, he remained silent for a few seconds before speaking. Eleanor, what they are doing is clearly illegal. No one can occupy your property without your consent. It doesn't matter if they are relatives of your daughter-in-law or if your son gave them permission. He is not the owner of the property. You are. So I can kick them out? I asked, feeling enormous relief. Yes, you can. In fact, you must do it immediately. If they refuse to leave, you can call the police and report them for trespassing. Do you have all the documents proving the farm is yours? Yes, I have everything. The deed, the mortgage receipts, everything is in my name. Perfect. Then my advice is that you go to your property, inform them clearly that they do not have permission to be there, and give them a reasonable time frame to pack their things and leave. If they refuse, call the police immediately. And tomorrow morning come to my office so we can review your full legal situation and ensure your son cannot make any claim on the property. Thank you, I whispered, feeling tears beginning to form in my eyes. Thank you for helping me. That's what we're here for, Eleanor. And remember, you are not doing anything wrong. You are defending what is rightfully yours. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about that. I hung up and sat in the car a few minutes longer. Mr. Harrison's words echoed in my head, giving me the strength I needed. I wasn't being selfish. I wasn't exaggerating. I was defending my right to decide over my own life, over my own house. I took 3 deep breaths and started the engine again. I continued down the highway with renewed determination. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't doubting. I knew exactly what I had to do. The road grew darker as I moved away from the city. Only my car's headlights illuminated the way. I knew every curve, every tree, every sign on this route I had driven hundreds of times. But tonight, everything felt different. Tonight I wasn't returning to my refuge. I was returning to take back what had been stolen from me. Finally, I saw the front gate to the farm. It was completely open, the metal gates swinging to the sides as if someone had pushed them forcefully. I always locked that gate. Always. It was one of my security routines. But now it was wide open, inviting anyone to enter. I drove through the gate and followed the dirt road leading to the house. Lights were on in every room. From outside, I could see movement through the windows. Shadows moving from one side to the other, people moving through my house as if it belonged to them. I parked the car near the main entrance and turned off the engine. I sat for a moment observing. I could hear music coming from inside. Laughter, the sound of voices chatting animatedly. They were celebrating, they were enjoying their new house, while I had just been humiliated at my son's wedding. I got out of the car and walked to the door. It was ajar. I always locked up when I left. But now the door to my house was open, as if it didn't matter who came or went. I pushed the door carefully and entered. The first thing I saw were the suitcases I had seen earlier. But now there was more. Open boxes with clothes strewn about, shoes thrown on the floor, grocery bags with food, a coat hanging on the entryway rack that wasn't mine. I walked toward the living room. There was more stuff there too. A laptop open on my coffee table, magazines I hadn't bought scattered on the sofa, glasses with drinks left without coasters on the wood I had polished with such care. I continued to the kitchen. The voices were coming from there. I walked in and saw them. Linda was at the stove cooking something that filled the house with a smell I didn't like. Richard was sitting at the table drinking beer from a bottle. Tiffany was leaning against the refrigerator with her phone in hand, laughing at something she saw on the screen. All three turned when they sensed me enter. For a moment there was total silence. They looked at me. I looked at them. No one said anything. Then Linda smiled. "Eleanor, so good you're here. We were making some dinner. Liam told us we'd be very comfortable here. The farm is beautiful. Get out of my house," I said, voice low but completely firm. The three of them looked at me as if they hadn't understood. Linda stopped smiling. Richard set the beer bottle on the table slowly. Tiffany lowered her phone. "Excuse me?" Linda asked, furrowing her brow. I said, "Get out of my house." I repeated louder. "All three of you. Right now." Richard stood up. "Eleanor, I think there's a misunderstanding. Liam told us we could stay here. He assured us you were on board." "I am not on board," I replied, feeling rage rise in my chest. "I never gave permission for you to enter my property. This house is mine. The deed is in my name, and you have no right to be here." Tiffany stepped forward, arms crossed. "You're exaggerating. We just need a place to stay temporarily. It's not a big deal. Besides, Liam is your son. You should want to help his in-laws." "You are not my family," I said, looking directly at her. "You are strangers who entered my house without permission. That is called trespassing, and if you don't leave voluntarily, I'm going to call the police." Linda let out a dry laugh. "You wouldn't do that. Liam would never forgive you. Think about your relationship with your son." "I don't have a relationship with my son anymore," I said, feeling the words come out easier than I thought. He decided to break it when he disposed of my house without consulting me, when he called me selfish in front of 200 people, when he chose to look good for you instead of respecting his mother. The silence that followed was heavy. Richard and Linda exchanged glances. Tiffany had dropped her arms and was looking at me with a mix of surprise and anger. "You have 48 hours to pack your things and get out of here," I said with a steady voice. "If in 48 hours you are still here, I will come with the police and they will remove you by force. And believe me, my hand won't shake to do it." "This is ridiculous," Tiffany shouted. "You can't kick us out like this. We have an agreement with Liam." "Liam doesn't own this property," I replied. "I do, and the only agreement that matters is the one I authorize, and I do not authorize you living here." Richard tried a different tactic. "Eleanor, let's be reasonable. We are going through a tough time financially. We just need a little time to stabilize. You have so much space here, it wouldn't cost you anything to share it." "It cost me 30 years of work to buy it," I said, feeling every word loaded with pain and anger. "It cost me sacrificing everything to have something of my own, and I am not going to give it away because it's convenient for you." I walked toward the wall phone in the kitchen. "I'm calling my lawyer right now, so this is documented," I said. "And tomorrow, first thing, I'm going to the sheriff's office to file a formal report. You have 48 hours, not a minute more." I dialed Mr. Harrison's number. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Harrison, I'm at the farm. They are here and refusing to leave. Tell them exactly what I instructed. 48 hours. If they don't leave, report them, and I will be there to back you legally." "Thank you," I whispered. I hung up and turned to the Sterlings. "You heard. 48 hours. And now get out of my kitchen. This conversation is over." I spent that night in my own house feeling like a stranger. I locked myself in my bedroom, something I had never done before because I had always been the only person living there. But now there were 3 intruders under my roof, and I didn't trust them. I heard their voices through the walls, occasional laughter, the sound of doors opening and closing, footsteps going back and forth. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, cell phone in hand in case I needed to call someone. Every noise startled me. Every creak of the wood put me on alert. This was my house, my sanctuary, and now I felt like a prisoner in my own room. When morning finally broke, I got up exhausted. I took a quick shower, dressed, and left the room, determined not to hide in my own home. The Sterlings were in the kitchen having breakfast. They had used my coffee maker, my mugs, my bread, my butter. They had served themselves as if it were all theirs. "Good morning," Linda said with a forced smile when she saw me enter. I didn't answer. I simply took a mug from the shelf, poured myself coffee, and went out to the porch. I wasn't going to argue with them. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I was just going to wait for the deadline to expire. I spent the morning in the garden, tending to plants, watering fruit trees, doing anything to keep busy. At 10 in the morning, I left the farm and drove to Mr. Harrison's office in the city. His office was in an old but well-maintained building downtown. I went up to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door with the sign, reading Harrison and Associates. A secretary showed me in, and minutes later I was sitting across from Mr. Harrison at his desk. He was a man of about 50, with graying temples and a serious but kind expression. He listened intently as I recounted all the details. I showed him the property deed, payment receipts, everything proving the farm was legally mine. "Your situation is clear, Eleanor," he said after reviewing the documents. "You are the sole owner of the property. Your son has no legal right to it. And the people occupying your house without your consent are committing a civil offense that borders on criminal trespass. If they don't leave voluntarily within the time frame you gave them, we can proceed with a formal eviction or trespassing charge." "And my son?" I asked, feeling my throat tighten. "Can he make any legal claim on the farm?" "No, unless you signed a document giving him rights to the property. Have you signed anything like that?" "Never," I replied firmly. "I never gave him any document related to the farm." "Then he has no rights. The property is yours and yours alone. My recommendation is that besides removing these people, you draw up a clear will specifying what happens to your assets in the future. That way you avoid confusion or appropriation attempts." I nodded, feeling a weight in my chest. Making a will meant accepting that my relationship with Liam was broken. It meant protecting myself from my own son, as if he were an enemy. But I knew it was necessary. "I also recommend," Mr. Harrison continued, "that you change the locks on your house immediately and install a security system, if you can afford it. You need to feel safe in your own home." "I will," I said. "I'll do whatever is necessary." I left Mr. Harrison's office with a list of steps to follow. First, I went to a hardware store and bought new deadbolts for all the doors. It cost me $120, but I didn't care. Then I went to an electronics store and asked about security systems. The most basic one was $300. It was money I hadn't planned to spend, but I needed it. When I returned to the farm at noon, the Sterlings were still there. They had hung their clothes on the clothesline in the garden, clothes hanging next to mine, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I felt a dull rage seeing it, but I breathed deep and entered the house. Tiffany was in the living room watching TV with the volume way up. Linda was in the kitchen making food that filled the house with strange smells. Richard was on the porch, smoking a cigarette, even though I had never allowed anyone to smoke on my property. "Not long until the deadline," I said loudly, so everyone could hear. Tiffany lowered the TV volume and looked at me with disdain. "Relax, Eleanor. You're not going to die from sharing your house a few more days." "It's not a few more days," I replied. "It is 48 hours. And when that time is up, if you are still here, I will call the police." Linda came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a rag. "You are acting in a very unchristian way. The Bible says we must help the needy. The Bible also says, 'Thou shalt not steal,'" I shot back. "And entering someone's property without permission is theft." Richard came in from the porch, cigarette still in hand. "Eleanor, think of Liam. He's going to be very upset when he finds out you kicked us out." "Liam already knows what I think," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "And if he decides to side with you instead of me, That is his decision. But I am not changing my mind. That night, they ate dinner in my kitchen using my food. I locked myself in my room with a sandwich I had made before they arrived. I heard their conversations through the door. They talked about me as if I couldn't hear them. "Crazy old woman," Tiffany said. "Selfish," Richard commented. Every word was a blow, but I didn't leave the room. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me react. I just waited for them to finish dinner, go to sleep in the rooms they had occupied without permission, and then I crept out to the kitchen to wash the dirty dishes they had left in the sink. The next day, when there was less than 24 hours left on the deadline, my phone rang. It was Liam. I looked at it for several rings before deciding whether to answer or not. Finally, I did. "Mom, you need to stop acting like this," he said without even saying hello. "Harper's parents called me saying you're threatening them with the police. This is ridiculous." "It is not ridiculous," I replied calmly. "It is my right. They entered my house without permission. I am not going to allow them to stay." "Mom, they just need a temporary place. You're not losing anything by sharing your space." "I am losing my peace," I said, feeling my voice crack a little. "I am losing my security. I am losing trust in my own son, who disposed of my property as if it were his own." "You've always been dramatic," Liam replied with a tired tone. "Always exaggerating everything. You can't just be generous for once in your life?" "I have been generous my whole life," I said, feeling the anger rise. "I was generous when I worked 3 jobs to pay for your college. I was generous when I supported you in every decision you made, even if I disagreed. I was generous when I accepted Harper, even though I saw from the start how she looked down on me. But this isn't generosity you're asking for. It's for me to let myself be trampled." "I'm not going to keep arguing this," Liam said. "The Sterlings are staying at the farm, period. If you have a problem with that, it's your problem." Then he hung up. I stood with the phone in my hand, feeling a huge void in my chest. My son had just hung up on me. My son, to whom I had dedicated my entire life, had just told me my feelings didn't matter. When the 48 hours were exactly up, I was in the living room, phone in hand, ready to call the police. The Sterlings were in the kitchen eating dinner calmly, as if nothing was happening. I dialed 911. "I need to report a trespassing," I said when the operator answered. "There are 3 people on my property refusing to leave, even though I gave them a legal notice." The operator took my information and told me a patrol car would arrive in less than 30 minutes. I hung up and waited. Linda came out of the kitchen with a look of disbelief. "You can't be serious. You're not actually calling the police." "I already did," I replied without looking at her. "They'll be here in less than half an hour. If you don't want to be arrested, I suggest you start packing." Richard appeared behind his wife. "This is absurd. Liam is going to be furious." "Let him be," I said, feeling a strange calm. "I don't care anymore." Tiffany entered the living room shouting, "You are crazy, completely crazy. What kind of person calls the police on their own family?" "You are not my family," I repeated for the umpteenth time. "You are intruders, and intruders are not welcome in my house." The next 25 minutes were chaotic. The Sterlings ran back and forth, shoving their things into suitcases in a rush. Linda cried dramatically. Richard cursed under his breath. Tiffany shot me looks of pure hatred while packing her belongings. When the police cruiser arrived, they already had everything packed and were loading the car they had parked in front of the house. 2 deputies got out of the vehicle and approached me. "Are you the caller, ma'am?" one of them asked. "Yes, I am the owner of this property," I replied, showing them the deed and papers I had prepared. These 3 people entered without my permission and refused to leave. The deputy reviewed the documents and then looked at the Sterlings. "Do you folks have any documentation showing you have a right to be here? A lease? Utility bill?" Richard tried to explain something about an agreement with my son, but the deputy interrupted him. "If the son isn't the owner of the property, he can't grant permission for you to live here. The owner is this lady, and she has every right to ask you to leave. Since you haven't established residency, this is trespassing." "This isn't over," Linda threatened as she got into her car. "We're going to talk to Liam. We're going to fix this." "There is nothing to fix," I said firmly. "Don't ever come back to my property. If you do, I will report you again." The Sterlings finally left, leaving a trail of dust on the road. I stood on the porch watching their taillights disappear into the distance. The deputies stayed a few minutes longer, taking notes for the report. "You did the right thing, ma'am," one of them told me before leaving. "No one has the right to invade your property, no matter who they are." When they finally left, and I was alone on the farm, I went inside and locked the door. The silence was absolute. For the first time in days, my house was mine again. I walked through every room, gathering the things the Sterlings had left behind. Forgotten clothes, magazines, trash. I cleaned the whole house that night. I washed the sheets they had used. I disinfected surfaces. I opened all the windows to let fresh air in. I wanted to erase any trace of their presence. The days following the eviction of the Sterlings were strangely quiet. I woke up every morning expecting some kind of retaliation, some furious call, some attempt to re-enter my property. But nothing happened. The silence was absolute, and that unsettled me more than any confrontation. The first task I did was change every lock in the house. I hired a locksmith who came early one morning and replaced every deadbolt. It cost me $250, but it was worth every penny. When he finished the job, I had a new set of keys and the certainty that no one could enter without my permission. Then came the installation of the security system. A technician arrived the next day and placed cameras at the main entrance, the gate, and the back of the house. He also installed motion sensors and an alarm connected directly to my cell phone. If anyone tried to enter, I would know immediately. The whole system cost $450. It was money from my emergency fund. But this was an emergency. Liam didn't call during those first few days. I checked my phone constantly, expecting to see his name on the screen, but it never appeared. Part of me wanted him to call so I could explain how I felt. Another part of me knew it was probably better this way. There was nothing to say that wouldn't end in another argument. I blocked Harper's number after she sent me 5 texts in a row, calling me selfish, bitter, and a bad mother. I also blocked Linda when she started sending me religious messages about forgiveness and charity. I didn't need to be bombarded with messages designed to make me feel guilty. I spent my days tending to the farm. I pruned the apple trees, fixed up the garden, painted areas of the house that needed maintenance. Every activity was a way to reclaim my space, to make it mine again. I cleaned obsessively every corner where the Sterlings had been. I wanted to wipe away any fingerprint of their presence. Nights were harder. When the sun went down and the house fell silent, thoughts arrived uninvited. I thought about Liam, about the boy he had been, about how he hugged me when he was scared, about how he told me I was the best mom in the world, about how all that had slowly disappeared until it became this. This painful rift I didn't know if I could fix. Sometimes I cried. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and let the tears fall freely. It wasn't just sadness for the loss of my son. It was also rage for everything I had sacrificed to get here. It was frustration, feeling that nothing I had done had been enough. It was fear of facing the rest of my life completely alone. But after crying, I dried my tears and breathed deep. I reminded myself I had made the right decision, that defending my dignity wasn't selfishness, that setting boundaries wasn't cruelty, that I deserved respect, even if it came from my own son. A week after kicking out the Sterlings, I received an unexpected visit. It was Sarah, my neighbor who lived on the farm 3 miles down the road. She arrived with a homemade pie and a worried expression. "Eleanor, I've been thinking about you," she said when I invited her in. "I heard what happened with your son. People talk a lot in town. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want the whole area knowing my family problems, but I also understood that in small towns, news travels fast. I want you to know," Sarah continued, "that you did the right thing. I've seen too many women our age get trampled by their own families, letting them take their houses, their savings, their peace, and then they end up with nothing. You were brave to defend yourself." Her words hit me deep. Brave. No one had called me brave in my whole life. I had always been the self-sacrificing one, the long-suffering one, the one who endured everything without complaint. But brave, that was a new word. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling my eyes fill with tears again. Sarah stayed all afternoon. We talked about our lives, about children growing up and forgetting everything one did for them, about the importance of taking care of oneself. When she left at sunset, I felt less alone, less judged, less guilty. That night, I slept better than previous ones. For the first time since the wedding, I didn't wake up startled in the middle of the night. I didn't have nightmares about people breaking into my house. I simply slept with the tranquility of knowing my home was truly mine again. Days turned into weeks. I established a new routine. I got up early, had breakfast on the porch watching the sunrise, worked in the garden during the morning, rested during the hottest midday hours, and dedicated afternoons to reading or doing minor repairs on the house. It was a simple life, but it was mine. Liam still didn't call. My son's silence was like an open wound that wouldn't heal. But I wasn't going to be the one to break that silence. I wasn't going to be the one apologizing for defending what was mine. If he wanted to talk to me, he knew where to find me. One afternoon, while watering plants, my phone rang with an unknown number. I hesitated before answering, but finally did. Eleanor, this is Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, good to hear from you. I'm calling to inform you I've prepared all the documents we discussed. Your will is ready. I also prepared a power of attorney so that in case of a medical emergency, you have someone trustworthy who can make decisions for you. We need you to come sign them. I'll be there tomorrow, I said, feeling a weight in my stomach. Signing those documents meant officially accepting that my family had fractured. The next day I drove to the city and signed all the papers. In my will, I left the farm to a charity organization that helped older women without resources. If Liam wanted anything from me after my death, he wasn't going to get it, and the power of attorney I gave to Sarah, my neighbor, who had proven to be more family in a week than my own son in years. When I left Mr. Harrison's office, I felt strangely liberated. I had taken total control of my life and future. No one could manipulate me. No one could take anything from me. I had reclaimed my power. 3 weeks after kicking the Sterlings out, I received another call from Mr. Harrison. His voice sounded satisfied. Eleanor, I have good news. I've reviewed all your legal documentation, and I can confirm your property is completely protected. No one can make any claim on it. Not your son, not your daughter-in-law, not her family. Everything is legally ironclad. I felt enormous relief hearing those words. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. You don't know how much this means to me. There is something else, he continued. I took the liberty of registering a preventive restraining order warning. If any of the Sterlings try to approach your property again, they will be violating a judicial order. It will be enough to have them arrested immediately. Is that necessary? I asked, feeling a bit of guilt. It's a precaution. You hired me to protect your rights, and that is exactly what I am doing. These people already demonstrated they don't respect boundaries. It's better to be prepared. You're right. Thank you for everything. I hung up and sat on the porch, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. I was legally protected, but emotionally I remained wounded. The wound of knowing my son had betrayed me in the most painful way possible. The following days were quieter. I had found a strange peace in my solitude. I woke up when I wanted, ate what I craved, spent afternoons reading books I had bought in town. My life was simple, but completely mine. Sarah came to visit twice a week. She brought homemade food, and we sat on the porch talking for hours. She told me about her own problems with her adult children, about how they also expected her to solve all their financial problems without ever thanking her for everything she had done. It's the curse of mothers of our generation, she told me one afternoon. We gave everything for our children, and now they think we owe them even more. Her words resonated with a painful truth. I had given my whole life for Liam, but he had never seen it as a sacrifice. He had seen it as an obligation, as something I had to do without expecting anything in return. One day, while I was in town buying supplies, I ran into Betty, an old coworker from the plant where I had worked for years. She hugged me tight when she saw me. Eleanor, long time no see. I heard what happened with your son. The whole plant is talking about it. I felt ashamed at first, but Betty continued speaking before I could respond. I want you to know that all the women you worked with are on your side. We all think you did the right thing. In fact, your story has inspired several of us. She leaned in. Christina finally told her daughter no when she wanted her to sell her house to give her the money. And Valerie stopped giving money to her son, who never worked a day in his life. I was speechless. I hadn't thought my situation could have any impact on other people. But apparently, my decision to defend myself had resonated with other women who were also tired of being trampled by their own families. "Thank you for telling me that," I whispered, feeling my eyes fill with tears. "You were always strong, Eleanor," Betty said, squeezing my hand. "Just that before. You didn't know it." That night, I sat in my room with the old journal I had started writing after James died. There were pages and pages of entries about Liam, about his achievements, his problems, his joys. Everything revolved around him. My whole life documented in those pages was about being a mother. But now I started writing about me, about Eleanor, about the woman who had worked 30 years to buy herself a farm, about the woman who had defended her right to have peace in her own house, about the woman who had said no when all her life she had said yes. Weeks turned into a month. Liam still didn't call. I checked my phone less frequently now. The pain of his silence was still there, but it wasn't as sharp. It had become a dull ache I had learned to carry. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, but something made me answer. "Eleanor, this is Chris from the credit union." "Yes, go ahead. I'm calling to inform you that your loan application has been approved. The $5,000 you requested for property improvements is available. You can come pick up the check whenever you like. I had applied for that loan 3 weeks ago. I wanted to make some renovations, install solar panels to lower my electric bill, and build a small greenhouse where I could grow vegetables year-round. They were projects I had dreamed of for years, but never had the courage to start. Thank you. I'll stop by tomorrow," I said, feeling renewed excitement. The next day, I went to the bank, picked up the check, and started planning the improvements. I hired a local carpenter for the greenhouse. I contacted a solar company. I bought new paint for the exterior. Every decision was mine. Every expense was for my well-being. Every project was for my future. Workers started arriving at the farm. The carpenter worked for 2 weeks building the greenhouse of my dreams. The solar technicians installed the system on the roof. I painted the exterior walls myself with a soft cream color I had always liked. The farm was transforming. It wasn't just where I lived anymore. It was my project, my masterpiece, my legacy to myself. Sarah came one afternoon to see the progress and smiled, seeing everything I had achieved. "Look what happens when you invest in yourself instead of people who don't value you," she said. She was right. For years I had invested all my money, time, and energy in Liam, and he had taken it as his right. But now I was investing in myself, and the difference was palpable. I felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in decades. One night, while admiring the finished greenhouse under the moonlight, my phone beeped. It was a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, I saw it was from Harper. "Your son is suffering because of you. I can't believe how cruel you've been to him and my family. I hope you can live with that guilt." I read the message twice. Before, a message like that would have destroyed me. It would have made me question every decision I had made. But now, I just felt a cold calm. I blocked the number without replying. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to explain anything. My actions spoke for themselves. I had defended what was mine, and that was enough. That night I slept deeply, surrounded by the peaceful silence of my farm. A silence that no longer scared me but comforted me. It was the silence of a woman who had finally found her own voice. 6 months had passed since Liam's wedding. 6 months since my life had changed completely. I was at the town's farmer's market buying fresh strawberries to make jam when I saw him. Liam was on the other side of the stand, looking at tomatoes with a distracted expression. He looked different, thinner, paler. There was something in his posture that denoted exhaustion. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Time seemed to stop between the vegetable stands and the bustle of the market. Then he took a step toward me. "Mom," he said softly. "Liam," I replied, maintaining my calm though my heart beat fast. "Can we talk?" he asked, pointing to a bench nearby. I nodded, and we walked in silence until we sat down. There was so much distance between us despite being side by side. He looked at his hands. I looked straight ahead. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that happened," he started finally. "Harper and I are having problems. A lot of problems. Her parents keep pressuring her to get money from somewhere. She pressures me. Everything is about money and properties and who has what. I listened without interrupting. It wasn't my place to fix his marital problems. I realized something, Liam continued, voice cracking. I never valued what you did for me. You worked your whole life to give me opportunities, and I took it as my right. I never thanked you. I never respected you. And when you finally had something of your own, I tried to take it from you. Tears began to fall down his cheeks. I looked at him and saw the boy he had been, the young man I had raised alone. But I also saw the man who had betrayed me. Forgive me, Mom, he whispered. Please, forgive me. I was a terrible son. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I breathed deep before speaking. Liam, what you did hurt me more than you can imagine. You didn't just try to take my house. You disrespected me. You humiliated me publicly. You called me selfish for defending what was mine. I know, he said, covering his face with his hands. I know, and I'm ashamed every day. But there is something you need to understand, I continued. I forgive you, not because what you did is okay, but because carrying that resentment would hurt me more than you. I forgive you. But that doesn't mean things go back to how they were. He looked at me with red eyes. What does it mean then? It means you have to earn my trust again. It means you will respect my boundaries and my decisions. It means you are never again going to try to manipulate or pressure me to do something I don't want to do. And it means your relationship with Harper and her family is your problem, not mine. Liam nodded slowly. I understand. I promise you, Mom, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be the son I always should have been. Don't make me promises, son. Show me with actions. We sat a few minutes longer in silence. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence now. It was a silence of understanding, of acceptance, of a new beginning that would have to be built with patience. How are you? He asked finally. How is the farm? It's beautiful, I replied with a small smile. I made a lot of improvements, installed solar panels and built a greenhouse. Now I grow my own vegetables all year round. I'd like to see it someday, he said timidly. If I allow it. Someday, I replied. When we are both ready. We said goodbye with a brief hug. It wasn't the warm hug of before, but it was a start. I watched him walk away through the market crowd and felt a mix of sadness and hope. Sadness for everything we had lost. Hope that perhaps, with time and effort, we could build something new. I returned to the farm at noon. The sun shone on the solar panels. The greenhouse was full of green, healthy plants. The freshly painted walls of the house looked beautiful under the clear light. This was my home, my sanctuary, my achievement. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and looked at the horizon. Life had taught me hard lessons in these last months. It had taught me that self-love is not selfishness, that setting boundaries is not cruelty, that defending what is yours does not make you a bad person. It had also taught me that it is never too late to take control of your own life, that at 64 you can still be brave, that you can still reinvent yourself, that you can still choose your own happiness. Sarah arrived that afternoon as she always did on Thursdays. She brought fresh bread and we sat together on the porch. I told her about my meeting with Liam. She listened intently and then smiled. You did the right thing, she told me. You gave him a chance, but you didn't gift him your trust. He has to earn that. That's right, I replied, feeling peace in my heart. That night, as the stars began to appear in the sky, I walked through my farm. I touched the trees I had planted. I smelled the flowers I had cultivated. I went into the greenhouse and checked my plants. All this was mine. I had built it with my work, with my sacrifice, with my determination. I stood in the middle of the garden and breathed the fresh night air. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. Free of expectations I couldn't meet. Free of sacrifices no one valued. Free of being who others wanted me to be. Now I was simply Eleanor, a 64-year-old woman who had learned to defend herself, a woman who had reclaimed her dignity, a woman who had found her own voice and was never again going to allow anyone to silence her. The future was uncertain. I didn't know if Liam would really change. I didn't know if our relationship would fully repair. I didn't know what awaited me in the coming years. But what I did know was this. My farm was mine. My life was mine. My decisions were mine. And no one, Absolutely no one was going to take that from me again. I went into the house, locked the door, and turned on the lights. Everything was in its place. Everything was exactly how I wanted it. This was my house. This was my home. This was my sanctuary. And I was at peace. Finally, after a lifetime of giving, of sacrificing, of putting others first, I was living for myself, and that feeling was more powerful, more liberating, more satisfying than anything I had experienced before. I went to bed that night with a smile on my face. Tomorrow would be another day on my farm, another day of my life, another day of being completely, genuinely free. And that was more than enough.